In the heart of the interstellar dominion, a vast station gleamed under the light of distant stars. It was known as Elysium, a place where the galaxy's most powerful races gathered to discuss the future of the universe. The air was thick with anticipation and arrogance as representatives from every corner of space filed into the grand hall. The hum of advanced technology vibrated through the floors. But for all the technological wonder, the assembly was about to turn its gaze to something far less advanced, far less impressive in their eyes. Earth. At the front of the gathering stood the Thrax, their towering forms exuding confidence and power. Their warlord Vrazo-Na was a presence unlike any other. His red skin shimmered under the station's artificial lights, his black armor reflecting a terrifying history of conquest and destruction. He was known across the galaxy for his ruthless campaigns and his unshakable belief in the supremacy of his people. He looked down upon the lesser species of the galaxy, and Earth was no different to him, a race barely scraping by in a violent universe. The idea that such a race could pose any threat was laughable. As the representatives took their seats, murmurs filled the hall. The humans had asked for a chance to prove themselves, showing their weapons in front of the council, an unprecedented request for a species so young in the grand scheme of galactic history. Earth had barely been part of the interstellar community for a few decades. Their technology was crude compared to the advanced civilizations that had existed for millennia. And now they were asking for respect by demonstrating their military might. Vrazo-Na shook his head with a grin, his claws tapping lightly on the armrest of his seat. The humans had made the mistake of thinking their technology could impress the galaxy. The truth was they had no idea what they were up against. The Thrax ships could destroy entire fleets with a single blast. Their weapons could obliterate planets. Their shields were impenetrable, and their tactics were flawless. A small race like Earth had no hope of standing against such power. As Vrazo-Na surveyed the humans who had been ushered to the front of the room, he could already feel his victory in his grasp. The ridicule would be inevitable. Earth would show their weapon, and it would be a pathetic display of something that could not even scratch the surface of Thrax technology. A human representative stepped forward. His uniform was crisp, but his face betrayed the nervousness of a species on trial. He stood at attention, his eyes scanning the room nervously. Before he began speaking, his voice was firm, but there was a noticeable edge of hesitation in it. Earth had no illusions about how they were perceived, but they had come this far. They would not back down now. "We stand here today," he began, "to show you what Earth can do, what humanity is capable of. We ask for your attention and your respect as we demonstrate a weapon we have developed. It is unlike anything you've seen before, and it is a sign of our potential in the universe. We have much to offer, and we will show you the strength of our resolve." Vrazo-Na chuckled softly. The other delegates around the room exchanged glances, some rolling their eyes, while others whispered among themselves. The humans' words were nothing more than a desperate plea for acceptance, the same plea every underdog made before being crushed in the harsh realities of galactic politics. They would soon learn their place, just as so many others had. But the humans stood their ground. The moment was tense. Their fate was on the line, and the council was ready to watch them fail. On Earth, beneath the towering structures of New Geneva, the Sol Federation was preparing for a moment that would shape the future of their species. The Federation's flagship, Excalibur, hummed with energy as its crew gathered in anticipation. General Lisa Munro, humanity's brightest military strategist, stood in the command center with her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated in the floor beneath her boots, and the tension in the air was palpable. This was more than just a demonstration of Earth's weaponry. It was their statement to the galaxy that humanity was not a race to be underestimated. The Vanguard plasma cannon, Earth's cutting-edge weapon, had been years in the making. It was the result of humanity's relentless determination to survive in a galaxy where the strong ruled and the weak perished. Unlike the hyper-efficient, elegant weapons wielded by galactic empires, the Vanguard was a raw, unrefined force. A weapon built not on perfection, but on the purest essence of human ingenuity. It was a symbol of what humans could accomplish when faced with overwhelming odds. It was not the most advanced weapon by any stretch, but it was the best humanity could make with limited resources. It was a blunt force object that had the potential to shatter preconceived notions. As General Monroe watched her crew prepare for the demonstration, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This was more than just proving Earth's strength. It was a chance to show that humanity was worthy of its place in the stars. She knew the galaxy viewed them as primitive. After all, their spacefaring days were only a few decades old compared to the ancient species around them. But humanity had something they didn't: creativity. They could take the most basic of technologies and mold them into something new, something unpredictable. "General," came the voice of her chief engineer, Lieutenant Harper. She turned toward him as he stepped into the command room. He was calm, but she could see the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. "We're ready to initiate the first shot. The Vanguard is fully charged and calibrated for the demonstration. But we're operating at the limits of what we can handle. If it doesn't work, we won't give them the chance to laugh at us." Monroe interrupted, her voice unwavering. "This is humanity's moment, Harper. We don't back down. We show them what we can do." Harper nodded, though the anxiety never fully left his expression. He respected Monroe. Everyone on this ship did, but he couldn't deny the uncertainty of this mission. They were going to fire a weapon that could potentially destroy one of the most powerful warships in the galaxy. But the Thrax didn't know what humanity was capable of, and that gave them the edge. "Captain, you're clear to begin the demonstration," Lieutenant Harper called over the intercom. Monroe turned to face the massive viewport where the Thrax cruiser waited, its sleek dark hull casting an intimidating shadow in space. The flash of light from the Vanguard plasma cannon lit up the dark expanse of space like a supernova. For a brief moment, everything felt frozen. Time itself seemed to stretch as the devastating beam sped toward the Thrax warship. The alien representatives aboard the Elysium station watched with a mix of condescension and curiosity, convinced that this demonstration would be nothing more than a failed attempt at appearing threatening. Vrazo Na, the Thrax warlord, couldn't help but smile as he leaned back in his seat. His species had fought and conquered for centuries, their fleets reigning supreme. What was this pathetic weapon of Earth compared to the might of the Thrax? The beam from Earth's weapon collided with the Thrax ship's shields with a shockwave that rattled the Elysium station. The alien forces on the warship expected an easy deflection, a minor blip in their systems. But what happened next shattered their confidence. Instead of dissipating harmlessly, the plasma beam punched through the shields with a force that even the Thrax hadn't predicted. The energy exploded in a cascade of crackling blue light, sending tremors through the ship's hull. For a split second, the Thrax bridge crew was silent, staring in disbelief. The beam continued to burn through the shield's weakened points, creating an opening that the ship's energy systems couldn't compensate for. On the Excalibur, the human crew erupted into a chorus of excited chatter. But General Monroe remained calm, her eyes narrowing as she studied the data on her console. This was the moment of truth. Had Earth's weapon really made a dent, or was it just a fluke? "Continue firing," Monroe ordered. "We've opened a weakness. Focus fire on that section." Lieutenant Harper quickly relayed the command to the weapon systems, and the Vanguard hummed again, building up more energy for the next shot. Meanwhile, Vrazo Na stood up from his seat, his face twisting in anger. The Thrax were not accustomed to being humiliated, especially by a species so new to the galactic stage. Their shield systems were considered invulnerable. And yet, this small, insignificant human ship had cracked them. "Redirect all power to shields," Vrazo Na barked to his crew. "Prepare to retaliate. Fire everything we've got." The Thrax warship's engines roared to life, and its weapon systems began charging. But before the first shot could even be fired, the second plasma blast from Earth's Vanguard hit, this time with even more precision. The first beam had weakened the shield's integrity, and now the second one tore straight through the gaps, scoring a direct hit along the warship's armored flank. Sparks flew from the breached section of the hull, and a loud, shrill alarm began to echo across the Thrax ship. The warlord's grip tightened around the armrest of his seat, his face now a mask of fury. The Elysium station itself seemed to vibrate with the growing tension. The alien council watched in stunned silence as the Vanguard fired a third time, hitting the warship with pinpoint accuracy. This time, the energy core was struck directly. A sharp, resonating crack filled the air, and the Thrax cruiser's massive engine began to sputter, a cascade of sparks and fire spreading across its hull. The Thraxra shuddered violently, its once mighty shields now all but useless. On the Excalibur, Monroe stood up, her expression unchanged. "Target the core. All power to the cannon," she ordered, her voice steady and controlled. The crew worked swiftly, fingers flying over consoles as the weapon locked on. The Vanguard powered up again, its core surging with energy. The third shot, this time focused directly on the warship's engine core, was unleashed in a final surge of brilliance. The beam hit with a devastating force, and the Thraxra shuddered once again, this time with a force so great that the ship seemed to fold in on itself. The explosion was deafening. The Thraxra detonated in a brilliant fireball that lit up the vacuum of space like a dying star, a shockwave rippling outward and sending debris scattering across the void. The alien representatives, once so sure of their superiority, stood frozen, their jaws slack in disbelief. The unthinkable had happened. The Excalibur crew watched in stunned silence as the remains of the Thrax warship were torn apart by the explosion. Vrazomna's face, which had once been filled with pride and arrogance, now seemed pale. The Thrax warlord stared at the screen, his mind racing to process the horror he had just witnessed. He had underestimated Earth. And now, in front of the entire galaxy, they had paid the price. The silence in the command center of Excalibur was deafening, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems. The crew stared at the screen in front of them, eyes wide, unable to fully comprehend what had just transpired. The Thrax warship, once a symbol of their invincibility, was now a cloud of burning debris floating in the cold vacuum of space. The shockwave from the explosion reverberated through the station, sending ripples of uncertainty through the intergalactic audience. General Monroe stood motionless, her hands clenched into fists by her sides. She had anticipated the blast would be powerful, but the sheer scale of destruction exceeded even her expectations. The Vanguard plasma cannon had not only destroyed the Thrax ship, it had obliterated it in a single, decisive strike. Her heart raced, but her expression remained impassive. This was no time for celebration. "Report," Monroe said in a voice that cut through the tension. Lieutenant Harper was the first to break the silence, his voice shaking slightly with awe, but still professional. "General, the target has been neutralized. Core breach confirmed. The Thraxra is no longer operational. We've received incoming transmission from the Elysium station. They're calling for a response." Monroe nodded, her eyes narrowing as the weight of the situation sank in. The entire galaxy had just watched as Earth's weapon wiped out one of the most advanced warships in existence. This was no longer just a demonstration. It was an unprecedented moment in galactic history. But with it came the undeniable realization. Humanity was no longer an underdog in the eyes of the universe. They had just declared their strength. Back on the Elysium station, the atmosphere was thick with shock and disbelief. The Thrax delegates were no longer speaking, their once boastful demeanor shattered. Vrazomna, now visibly shaken, stood at the center of the room. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by a deep, simmering anger that pulsed in the air. His fists were clenched, his mind racing to come to terms with what had just happened. He had underestimated Earth, and he knew it. His fleet, once the pride of the galaxy, had just been destroyed in a matter of seconds by a primitive race with nothing but ingenuity and brute force. This is impossible," Vrazomna muttered under his breath, his voice barely a whisper. He paced back and forth, ignoring the fearful glances of the other delegates. "Warlord," a voice from the back of the room interrupted. It was one of the alien council members, a member of the Xark species, an ancient race known for their advanced technological prowess. We must reassess the situation. The human weapon. Reassess. Vrazo Na snapped, whirling around to face the Xark's delegate. You saw what just happened. Their weapon, their primitive weapon, just annihilated the Thraxra with ease. There is no more to assess. Earth has proven itself a threat. The council room fell into a deep, uneasy silence as the full weight of Vrazo Na's words settled on the room. The thought of humanity, a species just beginning to make its mark in the galaxy, having the power to destroy one of the most formidable ships in existence, was too much to bear. The humiliation was unbearable. General Monroe's voice crackled through the communication line, her words cutting through the stunned quiet like a blade. Vrazo Na, you've had your chance. Now it's our turn. The Thrax warlord's expression darkened, and his anger reached a boiling point. This is far from over, human. We will not forget this insult. The Thrax will see you crushed. Monroe didn't flinch. Then you better be ready for what comes next. The transmission cut off, leaving the galaxy in stunned disbelief. Earth, with its unassuming appearance and its humble beginnings, had just struck a blow that would be felt across the stars. No one would be able to ignore humanity now. Their moment had arrived, and there was no going back. For General Monroe and her crew, this victory was just the beginning. A single shot had turned the tide, but the battle for respect, no, for survival, was far from over. What had begun as a display of power had now become a statement. Earth was no longer a forgotten world. It was a force to be reckoned with. The destruction of the Thraxra was still fresh in everyone's minds, but the threat was far from over. General Monroe knew that Vrazo Na would not let this humiliation go unanswered. The Thrax were a fierce and proud warrior race, and their sense of honor would demand retribution. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the remains of the Thrax warship drifted like a broken husk in space, but in Monroe's mind, the battle had just begun. Captain, status report on enemy movements, Monroe ordered, her voice calm but filled with an underlying tension. On the command deck, Captain Ramirez glanced at the tactical screen, his face pale. General, I'm detecting multiple Thrax warships approaching the Elysium. They're coming in fast, and they're heavily armed. We're estimating a fleet of at least 5 destroyers, plus support craft. They're going to retaliate. Monroe's eyes narrowed. She'd expected this, but the speed and intensity of the response still caught her off guard. Vrazo Na was angry, and when the Thrax were angry, they were ruthless. They would come for Earth with everything they had. Get us ready to defend ourselves, Monroe said, already moving toward the ship's weapons control station. We won't give them the satisfaction of thinking they can intimidate us. Let's show them that one shot wasn't a fluke. The Excalibur shook slightly as the crew scrambled into action. The Vanguard plasma cannon had done its job, but it wasn't enough to stop an entire Thrax fleet. The human ship was outgunned, outclassed, and outnumbered. But General Monroe had never backed down from impossible odds. If the Thrax thought they could destroy Earth, they would find a different story. As the Excalibur engaged its warp drives, jumping into a higher orbit to avoid direct fire from the incoming fleet, the crew worked quickly to reconfigure their weapon systems. The Vanguard cannon was powerful, but its charge time was lengthy, and the Thraxes would likely have the time to return fire. Monroe needed more than just a single weapon. She needed tactics, and she needed them fast. Lieutenant Harper, I want all non-essential systems down, Monroe ordered. Reconfigure the energy matrix to give us full firepower. We need the Vanguard ready in 2 minutes. Harper nodded, his fingers flying across his console as the ship's systems adapted to the new configuration. Understood, General. We're on track. Meanwhile, on the Elysium station, the atmosphere had shifted from disbelief to something darker. The other galactic representatives, once so eager to watch Earth fail, were now in hushed conversation. Some speculated that the humans had gotten lucky, that it was a fluke, while others whispered that this had been no accident. Earth's technology was primitive, yes, but their ability to think outside the box, to surprise and adapt, made them unpredictable. And that, in itself, was terrifying. The Thrax delegates were seething, barely able to contain their rage. Vrazo Na stood at the center of the room, his fists clenched. He had just lost face in front of the galaxy, and the sting of it was still raw. He had underestimated Earth, and now the humiliation was clear for all to see. But there was one thing he knew for sure. This was far from over. The Thrax would destroy the human ship and make an example of them. The galaxy would know that no one, not even a small species like Earth, could challenge the Thrax. Prepare to launch a full assault, Vrazo Na commanded, his voice low and threatening. We will not rest until Earth is crushed. Back on the Excalibur, Monroe watched as the incoming fleet of Thrax destroyers appeared on the horizon of the viewport. Their ships were massive, their guns capable of eradicating entire cities with a single shot, but Monroe didn't flinch. She'd faced worse odds before. All hands, brace for impact, she said with resolve, her voice steady. We'll make them regret ever underestimating humanity. The Excalibur accelerated toward the incoming fleet, the ship's weapon systems now fully charged. The crew, now united by the realization of just how far they'd come, stood ready to face the storm. The battle for Earth's survival was about to intensify. The Thrax fleet loomed ahead, its warships massive and imposing against the void of space. General Monroe's grip tightened around the armrest of her command chair as the tension in the Excalibur's bridge grew to an almost unbearable level. She could feel the pounding of her own heartbeat, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The Thrax were coming in fast, and they were coming for revenge. The enemy fleet's destroyers and support ships were almost within range. Captain, status of the Vanguard? Monroe asked, her voice calm but urgent. Fully charged, General, Captain Ramirez responded, his hands flying over the controls. But we've only got one shot before they close in. After that, it's a waiting game. We're outnumbered 4-1. Monroe's mind raced. The Vanguard plasma cannon was their strongest weapon, but firing it without crippling the enemy would be a waste. They needed to make this shot count. One chance, that was all they had. Adjust the aim, Monroe ordered, her eyes scanning the rapidly approaching Thrax fleet. Target the lead destroyer's engine core. We need to cripple their fleet's mobility. If we can disrupt their command ship, the others will hesitate. We're looking for momentum. Understood, Ramirez replied, quickly relaying the new orders to the weapons crew. On the view screen, the lead Thrax destroyer became a looming behemoth, its dark, jagged silhouette growing larger by the second. Its weapon systems were already powering up, signaling that the Thrax were preparing to unleash hell. The Excalibur had little time. Monroe could feel the heat of the impending battle. It was no longer just a fight for Earth's survival. This was about showing the galaxy that humanity could not be dismissed so easily. Lieutenant Harper, once the Vanguard fires, I want all shields and evasive maneuvers to be active. We need to survive the counterattack. Monroe added, no matter what happens, we hold steady. Harper nodded and began working on the tactical adjustments, his fingers flying across the controls with practiced precision. Aye, General. Shields ready. Evasive patterns programmed. The Excalibur was now racing toward the Thrax fleet, its engines roaring as it entered the danger zone. The Thrax destroyers fired first, their weapons lighting up with searing energy that danced toward the human ship. Monroe's heart skipped a beat as the first blast came dangerously close, shaking the hull of the Excalibur. The shields held firm, but the strain was visible. The next volley of fire would be harder to withstand. Hold your fire, Monroe called out to her crew, steadying her breath as the ship closed the gap. Get us closer. I need that shot to count. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity. The Excalibur was now within range of the lead Thrax destroyer, the enormous ship looming just beyond the viewport. Monroe's mind was sharp, her every instinct honed for this moment. She knew the Vanguard's shot would have to be perfect. Any miscalculation could mean the difference between victory and death. "Now," Monroe shouted, her voice a command of finality. The Vanguard plasma cannon fired once more, a bright beam of energy cutting through space with relentless force. The shot surged forward, breaking through the distance between the ships in a flash of brilliant light. As it reached the Thrax destroyer's massive hull, it struck with the fury of a star, a concentrated force that slammed directly into the ship's engine core. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the Thrax destroyer's engines flared in a violent explosion, sending a shockwave through space. The mighty ship shuddered violently as its propulsion systems failed, the force of the blast disabling the entire vessel. The once feared warship now drifted lifelessly, its immense size useless without the power to fight back. The remaining Thrax ships, witnessing the fate of their flagship, hesitated for a moment. That moment of doubt was all the Excalibur needed. "Target the next destroyer," Monroe ordered, her voice icy with resolve. "Let's keep up the pressure." Harper immediately relayed the command to the weapons systems, and the Vanguard powered up again. The crew, with hearts pounding and nerves steeled by battle, watched as the human ship began to shift tactics, maneuvering to exploit the Thrax fleet's newfound vulnerability. The tide had begun to turn, but the battle was far from over. The Thrax would not back down so easily. They had underestimated Earth once. Now, they were learning the hard way. The Excalibur moved with lethal precision, its course calculated to keep the Thrax fleet off balance. The moment the first destroyer was crippled, the remaining ships hesitated, just long enough for Monroe's crew to capitalize on the opening. The Vanguard plasma cannon was already charging again, but Monroe knew the battle was far from won. The Thrax were relentless, and they would come at them with everything they had left. "General, they're regrouping," Captain Ramirez reported, his voice tight with tension. "They're repositioning the remaining ships. It's a formation. They're attempting to cut us off." Monroe's eyes flicked to the tactical display. The Thrax had quickly adapted, and now their ships were arrayed in a defensive formation, creating a wall of firepower between the Excalibur and the rest of the fleet. The remaining destroyers, despite having lost their lead ship, were still formidable, each one capable of overwhelming Excalibur's shields with concentrated fire. "Bring us in closer," Monroe ordered. "We need to be in range to finish what we started." Evasive maneuvers to avoid the worst of their fire. Harper's voice cut through the tense atmosphere. "Evasive patterns locked, General. Shields are holding, but if they concentrate fire, we won't last long." The Excalibur was running on borrowed time. The Vanguard plasma cannon had been their ace in the hole, but now, with the Thrax fleet closing in, the human ship would be forced to rely on its agility and her crew's skill. They had one chance to turn the tide, one shot to show the galaxy that humanity's resolve was unshakable. Monroe's mind raced. They couldn't afford to miss. If they could take down another destroyer, they could force the Thrax into retreat, or at the very least, give Earth enough time to regroup and prepare for the inevitable aftermath. There was no way to know how many more ships were waiting in the wings, but the Vanguard's ability to cripple a Thrax warship in a single shot gave humanity a glimmer of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. "Fire when ready," Monroe commanded. A ripple of energy coursed through the Excalibur as the Vanguard powered up, the air crackling with tension. The crew held their breath as the massive cannon charged, its hum growing louder by the second. Time seemed to slow as the seconds ticked down to the release of the next blast. The Thrax ships fired first, their weapons lighting up the void with deadly intensity. Streams of energy erupted from the destroyer's guns, streaking through space in an attempt to catch the human ship in a crossfire. Excalibur's shields flared bright with each impact, but they held steady. The Vanguard was almost ready. "General, we can't take much more of this," Ramirez warned. "Their fire is intensifying. Our shields are at 60%. Monroe barely glanced at the damage reports. "We can't afford to miss this shot, Captain." "Aim true." The moment the Thrax ships fired their last volley, Monroe gave the order. Fire. The Vanguard plasma cannon released its energy in a brilliant, blinding flash. The beam of pure destruction shot toward the nearest Thrax destroyer, a massive target that loomed before them. The explosion that followed was nothing short of apocalyptic, a burst of light and fire that engulfed the enemy ship in a flash. The Thrax warship's shields couldn't hold, and the Vanguard's force tore through its hull with ease, just as it had with the first destroyer. The Thrax ship exploded, its remains scattering across space in a fiery mass. One more warship was gone, and the Thrax fleet had lost its second core vessel. The remaining destroyers, now facing the combined fury of the Excalibur and its crew, began to break formation, hesitation creeping into their tactics. The sudden vulnerability of their fleet was palpable. But before Monroe could issue another order, a new voice crackled over the comms, a transmission from the Elysium. "This is Supreme Warlord Vrazo Na," the voice boomed across the channel, cold and threatening. "You may have destroyed our ships, but this war is far from over. The Thrax do not forgive humiliation." Monroe's eyes narrowed, but her resolve never wavered. She responded calmly, yet firmly. "Then come at us, Vrazo. We'll show you just how far we've come. This isn't your galaxy anymore." The transmission cut off, and the Thrax ships seemed to hesitate for a brief moment, as if waiting for new orders. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, humanity had shown the galaxy that it could stand up to the galaxy's mightiest powers. Monroe turned to her crew. "Prepare for the final push. We don't stop until they know they've lost." The Thrax had underestimated humanity once. They would never make that mistake again. The Excalibur hovered at the edge of the Thrax fleet's remaining formation, the sounds of its systems purring in the silence between battles. General Monroe stood at the center of the bridge, her gaze fixed on the tactical screen as the Thrax warships hesitated, clearly uncertain of their next move. The defeat of two of their most powerful destroyers had shattered their sense of invincibility, but Vrazo Na's threat still hung in the air. The Thraxes weren't done yet. They were gathering their strength, preparing for a last-ditch attempt to wipe Earth off the map. Monroe knew the situation was precarious. The Excalibur had just barely survived the Thrax's opening assault, and despite the damage, they had pressed on with a ferocity that surprised even her. The Vanguard plasma cannon had done its job, but that one weapon was not enough to turn the tide of an entire war. Earth would need to show its enemies that they could do more than just survive. They could win. "General," Captain Ramirez's voice cut through her thoughts, his tone urgent. "The Thrax are regrouping. They're realigning their ships for one final strike. We can't stay here and wait for them to hit us. We need to move." Monroe nodded, her mind calculating. The Thrax fleet had suffered heavy losses, but it was still a formidable force. The remaining ships had pulled back into a defensive formation, each one now focused on the Excalibur. Vrazo Na had made it clear that he wouldn't stop until humanity was destroyed, and this was likely the last, best chance the Thrax had to accomplish that goal. Earth had to hit them first. "Lieutenant Harper," Monroe said, her voice firm, "initiate evasive maneuvers. I want us weaving through their formation. Captain, deploy all drones. Now." The crew immediately sprang into action. Harper worked his controls with precision, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface as the Excalibur veered sharply, dodging a barrage of incoming fire. The drones, small, nimble, but packed with enough firepower to destroy any ship they came into contact with, shot out from the Excalibur, spreading across the battlefield like a swarm of angry hornets. Their small size made them difficult targets, and their unpredictable movements threw the Thrax off balance. "We've got their attention," Ramirez said, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "But they're coming for us, General." Monroe watched as the Thrax ships scrambled to reconfigure their firing solutions, the chaos of the drones causing their once impressive discipline to falter. But Monroe's eyes were already focused elsewhere, on the flagship of the Thrax fleet, which had remained behind, stubbornly holding its position. "Target their flagship," Monroe commanded. "Use everything we've got. Their leader is sitting there, waiting for the final blow. We'll give it to him." The Vanguard plasma cannon hummed to life again, its charging sound reverberating through the ship. The Excalibur accelerated, weaving between the remaining Thrax ships with lightning speed. For a moment, it felt as though the entire universe held its breath. "Ready," Harper called, his voice taut with anticipation. "Fire," Monroe ordered. The shot rang out, a brilliant streak of light that sliced through space, straight toward the heart of the Thrax flagship. The beam collided with the ship's hull, sending shockwaves rippling through the fleet. The explosion was magnificent, a violent burst of energy that splintered the Thrax warship into 1,000 flaming pieces. A massive section of the flagship's core collapsed in on itself, and the remaining Thrax ships scattered, their once coordinated assault turning into a disorganized retreat. For a long moment, there was silence. Then the voice of Razom-Nah crackled through the comms again, his tone broken and bitter. "This isn't over, human. You've only won today. The Thrax will rise again." Monroe's voice was steady as she replied, "We'll be ready when you do." The transmission ended, and the remaining Thrax ships disappeared into hyperspace, fleeing in disarray. The battlefield was eerily quiet now, save for the debris of the destroyed warships slowly drifting in the void. The crew of the Excalibur let out a collective breath, the relief palpable, but tempered by the knowledge that the war was far from over. They had won today, but the Thrax were not a species to back down easily. "General," Captain Ramirez said, his voice laced with awe, "we did it. We really did it." Monroe stood tall, her expression hardening as she surveyed the damage on the tactical display. "This isn't a victory to celebrate. It's just the beginning. We've sent a message to the galaxy, but now we need to make sure that message is heard loud and clear. Earth is a force to be reckoned with." The crew nodded in silent agreement. The Excalibur had survived. Earth had survived. But in a universe full of countless dangers, the real fight for survival had only just begun.